It's September 2025 and this is my video number 340. Most of the others have of course been permanently deleted by the censors on the grounds that they contain lots of truths which the bad guys found uncomfortable. A couple of weeks ago, a British MP called Stephen Kinnock, apparently Minister of State for Care and probably best known to some for being the son of Neil Kinnock and Mrs. Kinnock, allegedly told the BBC that the government was concerned about vaccine uptake and hesitancy. He said this had increased after the COVID-19 pandemic and added that campaigns explaining, quotes, the benefit of getting vaccinated and the fact that this is 100% safe would be brought forward as the government sought to win this battle against the conspiracy theorists, close quotes. Why did he say that? Why would anyone say that? You wouldn't think anyone could be that stupid, would you? Am I allowed to describe the Minister of State for Care as stupid? I don't know. It was reported on the BBC, so it must be true. Well, a bit true anyway. Maybe they quoted him, maybe misquoted him. Maybe what he really said was, I'm booked in for my brain transplant next week and the doctor said I must eat lots of green beans. I don't know. You never know with the BBC. Britain's official propaganda unit, the everlasting source of disinformation and misinformation. The Minister of State for Care, and it's a comfort to know we apparently have one, said, apparently with a straight face, that the government was also committed to combating disinformation and conspiracy theories about vaccines on social media. Perhaps I should mention that Master Kinnock has apparently worked with, for or at the World Economic Forum and allegedly also supports doctor-assisted dying, something which is perhaps not entirely unexpected in view of his support for vaccines. It is our job as the government and everybody else out there that is on the side of common sense and reason, he said, to make this case and to win this battle against the conspiracy theorists and misinformers and disinformers out there who need to be dealt with and need to be silenced, Kinnock added. Now, I've been studying vaccines for around 60 years, and my conclusion is to say that any vaccine is 100% safe. It's like saying bombs never kill people. Or the British Prime Minister for now, Keir Starmer, is 6'4" and charismatic, or that no one's been killed in Gaza. Kinnock's problem, and it's shared by pro-vaxxers around the world, is that if you exaggerate, you lose your credibility. The blatant lies about the COVID-19 vaccine destroyed the government's credibility with intelligent people. Today, any informed person knows that the politicians, journalists and doctors who oversold the COVID-19 vaccine should be arrested, thrown into the Tower of London for 100 years, or probably longer. Mr. Kinnock Jr. should take a cold, hard look at the evidence about the COVID vaccine, much of which was available back in 2020 when I first described the stuff as toxic and useless. But sadly, I doubt if he will, preferring to stick with his prejudices and to continue to promote vaccine misinformation and to threaten to silence those who tell the truth. Silence is a very emotive word, Mr. Kinnock. It's what dictators use when they're thinking of firing squads, and when you've already been the would-be victim of one attempted assassination, as I have, it's a word which is unacceptable. I suppose it all depends on how you define safe, but I'd argue that there isn't a vaccine in the world which is 100% safe, though this isn't the first time that such an absurd claim has been made. To be clear, my dictionary defines safe as not likely to cause or lead to harm. The big question is, how does Mr. Kinnock explain why governments around the world have paid out billions of dollars to families of vaccine-damaged patients, and why does his government pay out huge sums of money to those who've been damaged by vaccines, if vaccines are 100% safe? And what's all this about silencing people? Actually, I'm pretty well already silenced for the crime of telling the truth. Why does the BBC and the rest of the mainstream media and most of the internet refuse to allow any debate about vaccination? Why am I banned from all mainstream media, YouTube and all social media? Because I've drawn attention to the very real dangers of vaccination. Silencing people is the new way. These days, if you're a powerful politician and you don't like uncomfortable truths, then you silence people rather than debate with them. If Kinnock really believes that vaccines are completely safe, then wouldn't it be wise to encourage public debate about vaccination? That would surely shut up all the vaccine critics and make it easy for the government to promote its vaccine programs more successfully. I challenged Master Kinnock to a debate on live national television. He could argue that vaccines, including the COVID-19 vaccine, are 100% safe and effective. He could bring as many advisors as could be fitted into the studio, and I would argue that he's wrong just by myself. That should put this subject to rest one way or the other. But you won't be surprised to hear that he didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. His advisors would have never allowed it. Because the ones who can read would know that I would win and Kinnock would lose. Then that's why debate isn't allowed. It's why the BBC doesn't allow criticism of vaccines. Did you know they do that? The BBC's policy is not to allow airtime to anyone questioning vaccination. Quotes, whether right or wrong, close quotes. Their words, not mine. I've been writing about vaccines for a long time. In my first book, The Medicine Men, which was published in 1975, when you were all busy going to discos, I pointed out that BCG vaccination for tuberculosis was introduced in 1928, but 72 children died in 1930 after a vaccine contaminated with a virulent bacillus had been used. I pointed out that in 1955 in the United States there were 204 cases of polio in inoculated children. And I pointed out back in 1975 in The Medicine Men that there were a lot of vaccine-damaged children in the UK. I pointed out that surveys showed that between 1 in 3,000 and 1 in 6,000 children had some form of cerebral illness after a whooping cough vaccine. I published all that in 1975, and things have been getting steadily worse. Today, you're unlikely ever to hear the truth about any medical matters in the mainstream media, and you certainly won't hear any truths in the mainstream media about vaccines. The pro-vaxxers continually recite the usual nonsense about vaccines being safe and effective when they're patently not safe or effective. Everything they say is a lie. They love talking about Jenner and his smallpox vaccine, but they never mention that Jenner's first son, the one he vaccinated, developed brain damage and died young. Jenner didn't have his second son vaccinated. They don't tell you that, do they? These days, doctors only get to read and hear what the drug industry wants them to read and hear. Anything controversial, anything questioning the status quo must be suppressed. Some time ago, I was invited by a company called Pass Test to speak at a conference intended to tackle the subject of medication errors and adverse reactions to prescribed drugs. Building on our commitment to quality in medical and healthcare education, they said, Pass Test is creating a range of healthcare events which focus on the professional development of clinicians and managers who are working together to develop healthcare services for the UK. Our aim is to provide a means for those who are in a position to improve services on both national and regional levels. The topics covered by our conferences are embraced within policy, best practice, case study, clinical management and evidence-based practice. Pass Test endeavours to source the best speakers who will engage audiences with balanced, relevant and thought-provoking programmes. Pass Test has proven in the past that by using thorough investigative research and keeping up to date with advances in healthcare and medical practice, a premium educational event can be achieved. Close quotes. That's what they said. Sounds wonderful, I thought, in one of my more naive moments. Iatrogenesis, doctor-induced disease, is something of a speciality of mine. I've written numerous books and articles on the subject. My campaigns have, I think, resulted in more drugs being banned or controlled than anyone else's. In addition to my speaking at the conference, the organisers wanted me to help them decide on the final programme. I signed a contract. Pastest wrote to confirm my appointment as a consultant and speaker. And then there was silence. Eventually a programme for the event appeared on the internet. Curiously, my name wasn't on the list of speakers. Here's part of the blurb promoting the conference. Against a background of increasing media coverage into the number of UK patients who are either becoming ill or dying due to adverse reactions to medication, our conference aims to explain the current strategies to avoid adverse drug reactions. Here's the good bit. And what can be done to educate patients. Close quotes. Putting the blame on patients for problems caused by prescription drugs is brilliant. Most drug-related problems are caused by the stupidity of doctors, not the ignorance of patients. If the aim is to educate patients on how best to avoid prescription drug problems, the advice would be simple. Don't trust doctors. The list of speakers included a variety of people I never heard of, including one speaker representing the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry. What a surprise. So why was I apparently banned from this conference? This is what Pastest said when we asked them. Certain parties felt that he, that's me, was too controversial to speak and as a result would not attend. Close quotes. Is the drug industry now deciding whom they will allow to speak to doctors and NHS staff on the problems caused by prescription drugs? Do NHS bosses know that people attending such very expensive conferences will only hear speakers approved by the drug industry? And the speakers telling the truth will be banned. The scary bottom line is that the NHS paid to send delegates to a conference where someone representing the drug industry spoke to them on drug safety, but I was banned. The question is this: if doctors or drug companies believe I'm wrong, why won't they let me speak and then explain why they think I'm wrong? The unavoidable answer is that they know my criticisms of the profession and the industry are accurate and unanswerable. What happened with Pastest is by no means unusual. All sorts of strange people, mainly politicians and administrators, have taken control of medical care these days. Their brains are uncluttered with scientific stuff, and they just know best. Vaccination is now a political issue rather than a scientific issue. Facts are just a damn nuisance that get in the way, and about as welcome as a hot dog vendor at a vegetarian meeting. I haven't been invited or allowed to discuss vaccination on the radio or TV for many years. This is largely because the medical establishment, having lost a long series of debates, will no longer agree to debate any medical topic with me, or indeed to appear on any programme which dared to invite me to be a participant. The last time I discussed vaccines on the radio was a couple of decades ago. I was, to my immense surprise, invited to discuss vaccination on a late evening radio programme. A local doctor was invited to debate with me. The result was extraordinary. For quite a while, the doctor refused to admit that doctors make any money out of giving vaccines. Until I pressed him directly, he indignantly denied that doctors have a financial interest in promoting vaccination. Only when I pointed out that GPs receive fees and bonuses for vaccinating their patients did he, rather reluctantly, agree that I was right. The doctor's main defence seemed to me to be that because the government and some other doctors agreed with his views on vaccination, which were naturally diametrically opposed to mine, then he must be right and I must be wrong. I've never found this a very convincing argument, and nor, for a while at least, did the listeners. The presenter wanted to know why the facts I was giving had never been aired before. At the end of the programme, I was told that the radio programme had never before had such a response from their listeners. Listeners, they said, were desperate for more information. At the end of the programme, I was asked if I'd make another, longer programme on the subject of vaccination. I said I would. I offered to debate the subject of vaccination with any number of pro-vaccine doctors and experts the radio station could find. I never heard from them again. I contacted them to ask if they were still interested in another, more intensive debate. They weren't. And since then, no other radio or TV station has been prepared to allow me to discuss vaccination on air. I doubt if this will change. Patients, like doctors, will be protected from inconvenient truths. The media in general is constantly full of articles and programs sneering at those who worry about vaccination and promoting vaccination as safe and effective. Most doctors are unquestioning too frightened to upset the establishment. Asking uncomfortable questions can ruin a doctor's career, and medical journalists are just as useless. Most have very little formal medical training, they don't know what to look for, and they not infrequently receive payments from drug companies, with the payments offered for articles written for drug company publications. The money involved far in excess of the sort of payments the journalists would normally expect to receive. So journalists hardly ever have the courage to take on the establishment. The power of the pro-vaccine lobby is powerful and far spread. When I wrote a column for the Oriental Morning Post in China, I wrote one column criticising vaccination. After the column appeared, my book publishers in China wrote to tell me that the Chinese government had informed them that they could no longer publish my books. I was very effectively banned. Much the same thing has happened in other countries. I used to have books in 26 languages. Now I publish my own books in English. One piece of good news is that, contrary to popular opinion, a good many doctors are now worried about the medical profession's unbridled enthusiasm for vaccination. Most prefer to remain anonymous. Here's one of many relevant letters which I've received from practicing doctors in recent years. This one came from a GP. He wrote, quote, "Your criticism of vaccines is entirely justified. The medical profession has come under the baleful influence of the drug companies, and so doctors have to pretend that vaccines can do no harm. I'm a doctor and regard vaccination as a fraud and a farce. The witches in Macbeth might well have included modern vaccines in their recipe." The truth is that of all the forms of drugs available, vaccines are the crudest and the most unreliable and most dangerous. Vaccines can cause brain damage and they can kill. I'm always startled that this should surprise anyone. If you inject potentially toxic substances into small children, it seems pretty obvious to me that you'll get problems. The most significant known fact about vaccines is that they can cause brain damage. This isn't theory or supposition, it's fact. And yet potential problems are not properly investigated. For example, doctors have noticed that there is a relationship between vaccination and protracted, inconsolable, high-pitched screaming occurring shortly afterwards. This seems to be consistent with a link between vaccination and brain damage. This link could be deeply embarrassing for politicians, doctors and drug companies, and has not been properly investigated. Astonishingly, when the American Academy of Pediatrics announced that 1 in 6 American children had a developmental disorder or a behavioural disorder, no one mentioned the possibility that vaccines might be responsible. No one in authority seemed to know just why so many American children should be in such poor shape. "It doesn't seem fair," said one expert. "We look after our children so well. American children have more vaccinations than children in any other country." Close quotes. Here's a list of some of the side effects which may be caused by vaccination. Not all vaccines produce all these side effects, of course, but on the other hand, this list is by no means complete, and there are undoubtedly other side effects which may result from vaccination. And don't forget, they say vaccines are 100% safe. Here's a list. Brain damage, paralysis, pain, fever, nausea, dizziness, gastrointestinal disturbances, lost appetite, restlessness, headache, malaise, pain, allergy reactions, irritability, itching, Bell's palsy, seizures. They're just some of the serious problems. Just how many side effects and problems are there? It's difficult to say. 4 separate studies have shown that there are higher rates of asthma in fully vaccinated children. Vaccines can even cause symptoms which seem to me to be very similar to the symptoms of the disease they're supposed to prevent. The symptoms of long COVID just happen to be exactly the same as the symptoms of COVID vaccine damage. A complete list of the possible side effects associated with the flu vaccine may also include asthma, brain swelling, facial paralysis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, damage to eye muscles, damage to the arm and shoulder muscles, bruising, abdominal pain, kidney disorders, hives, and anaphylaxis. A study published in the International Journal of Clinical Investigation showed that those who've had the flu jab for 5 years in a row have a 10-fold increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Doctors always seem to forget to mention this when pushing their annual and highly profitable flu jab campaigns. It's not known whether the flu vaccine can trigger cancer, infertility, or other serious health problems. The body's immune system fights cancerous cells, and indeed some anti-cancer therapies are designed to boost the immune system and to help it fight a developing cancer. So could repeated vaccinations affect the body's susceptibility to cancer? Could repeated vaccinations make the body less able to deal with a developing cancer? No one knows. It's hardly surprising that doctors are now firmly established as one of the 3 main causes of illness and death. 50 years ago, I pointed out on TV that 1 in 6 patients in hospital were there because they'd been made ill by a doctor. Well, we didn't make the other 5 ill, said a doctor's representative in the studio. You won't be surprised to hear I haven't been allowed near a TV studio for decades. No medical doctor or scientist can possibly endorse the prescribing of vaccines as they're used at the moment, but as the quality and quantity of healthcare continues to be reduced, so the enthusiasm for vaccination will increase. They've pretty well swamped children with vaccines. Now they're aiming at the elderly. I'm constantly bombarded with letters, texts, emails, and phone calls offering me vaccinations. Though I gather the offer will for me end next year, they told me. They don't now give vaccinations to the over 80s. Maybe that's just me. Most doctors know nothing about vaccines that they haven't been told by drug companies. Let's finish up with a return look at the COVID-19 vaccine, the one they say saved the world, but which I have repeatedly described as toxic and useless. In February and March of 2020, I warned that COVID was just the rebranded flu and that the authorities would quickly introduce a vaccine which they would make compulsory. It wasn't difficult to see what was going to happen. For 5, getting on to 6 years now, I've been deeply saddened by the fact that many doctors have supported the official line without ever daring to question what they've been told. Government authorities in the United States reported early on that the COVID-19 vaccines caused a huge variety of dangerous side effects, or could cause a huge variety of dangerous side effects. Indeed, the incidence of death and serious side effects was reported to be over 2.5%. Logically, this means that if you vaccinate 100 people, then 2.5 of them will die or have notable side effects. The side effects involved with the COVID-19 vaccine include serious neurological problems, heart attacks, strokes, blindness, and as I'm sure you know, many other disorders. I think it's an insult to the patients who've been damaged to describe their side effects as mild. All this is particularly relevant when you remember that COVID-19 has a mortality rate which is much the same as the ordinary flu. And as I'm sure you know, the World Health Organization said early on that vaccines don't stop people getting COVID-19 or passing it on. Doctors were busy recommending the COVID jab for pregnant women or women who might get pregnant, but back in December 2020, a petition filed with the European Medicines Agency suggested that there's a plausible evidence to suggest that the spike proteins in the mRNA vaccines could trigger an immune reaction against syncytin-1, a protein which is responsible for the development of a placenta in humans. Finally, it's worth remembering that according to the journal Nature, for every 1,000 people under the age of 50 who are infected with the coronavirus, almost none will die. The risk of a young, healthy woman dying of COVID-19 is not very different to the risk of her being struck by lightning. I was appalled when it was announced that doctors were planning to give the experimental, not fully tested, temporally approved COVID-19 experimental vaccine to children without having to obtain parental permission. At the time, I described what was happening as both child abuse and assault and offered this advice to children. Don't trust people in cars who offer you sweets. Don't trust people with syringes who offer you jabs. I was writing about the risks of the COVID vaccine throughout 2020, and for that I was banned, abused, lied about consistently and threatened. Legions of independent doctors around the world say it isn't safe to give these dangerous toxic jabs to children who have very little risk of catching COVID-19, let alone dying of it. I suspect that the few doctors promoting this scheme are largely those who, one way or another, stand to make money out of it. The BBC's own misinformation expert, who doesn't have any medical qualifications, has said those who make anti-vax claims usually don't have a scientific or medical background. Now that's odd, because I know a lot of medical doctors who are, by the BBC's definition, anti-vaxxers. In fact, I believe I could find more doctors who are opposed to giving this toxic vaccine to children than the BBC's misinformation expert or the BBC could find supporting giving it to children. In March 2020, when I had warned that the COVID hoax was all going to be about pushing vaccines onto the public, people laughed and sneered, but that's exactly what happened. In the autumn of that year, I warned about the precise nature of the problems that would develop. How? Well, partly because I've been studying drug problems for nearly 60 years, but also because I looked at the FDA's draft working list for potential side effects associated with the vaccine. The list is on my website, vernoncoleman.com, if you're interested. Don't tell anyone that you've watched this, or they may arrest you. The truth is a dangerous commodity these days. But if you want to keep in touch, there's a lot of material on my website. The website address is www.vernoncoleman.com. There are no fees, no adverts, or you can follow my thoughts on Substack, though I don't know how long that will last. Once again, there's no fees or adverts. The only way we can stop what's happening is to fight it, and the only way to do that is by sharing and spreading the truth. Please tell everyone you know what you've learnt today, and together we can protect our loved ones and ourselves and our future. It's our lives and our world that is at risk. And thank you for watching an old man in a chair.